The world is a fantastic place, riddled with all kinds of wondrous creatures, and all manner of fabulous arts. It was a world of magic and of monsters, and where there are monsters to be found, there are quests to be had. And so came a business so brilliant that so many thought they had to join. And the Questing Guild was born. Sponsored by the Crown, of course. Excepting that the Crown was growing poor, and eventually the guild was bought out from under them by greedy bankers. And one guild soon became 2, 4, 10, and more, all rivaling each other for prestige and power. But surely, with so many guilds, the monsters must have run out, right? One might ask. Now, everyone with a lick of sense knows that the best way to keep a business running is to create a supply, preferably unending in nature. And so, perhaps often more discreetly than not, the guilds would make problems for their staff to inevitably solve. And a profit, of course. Troll farms and mimic making became side hustles worth pursuing, and even dungeon architects were employed by the guild to make things both entertaining and challenging for opponents, and, like all things, on a tight budget. Unfortunately for the newly established, jolly, and rather green guild called Evensong Guild of Adventuring, they never quite got the memo on this, and so, perhaps to the profit, or perhaps to the excruciating chagrin of Master Architect Alphonse de Bois and the Guild of Unending Challenge, Evensong found themselves at the foray of a mighty fine dungeon at Sellers Rook. It is where our story truly begins. Let me take the time to introduce our cast. Delphine the Black, sorceress divine, clad in dusty robes, far-travelled, and knotted brown hair pushed back by an unnecessarily extravagant circlet, she kept herself propped up lazily on a staff of finely moulded oak. Beside her is the esteemed gentleman, private eye, and sometimes thief, Dexter Darkfang, an elderly gentleman of modest repute, who seemed forever entranced by excruciatingly gaudy clothing, namely the petticoat top hat and monocle he insisted on wearing, despite the latest fashions. The third of our quintet is little more than a circus act. Sinewy and lithe, a woman more used to the sky than land, and walking on hands, for no legs but wooden replacements they possessed. A cheeky grin would often run the face of Astrid Evensong, and many would wonder what exactly the mischievous gal was up to. Then came the grizzled war veteran, a callous lass named Octavia. A military sergeant who hadn't quite figured out her poor tactics and lack of wits were often the cause of her many misdemeanors. Now encased in a fine silver plate with cornrows pushing down her dark scalp with tiny bells signaling her presence. Finally, we have her protege, the equally clueless bannerman Deus, who with his ruffled hair and blue cloak often chased his own shadow as much as he did a foe, and preferred the company of books from his tiny spectacles than the company of others. In short, they were idiots. But idiots can sometimes have the best stories to tell. This party from Evensong, after travelling dozens of miles, found themselves at Sellers Rook, confident but tired. After a night's rest at the nearby village of Ordus, they examined the rook, and Dexter's keen eyes discovered a tunnel unseen from the outcropping by the naked eye. Dexter led the party down into a cavernous system said to be inhabited by raiding goblins that tormented the town. However, unbeknownst to the Evensong adventurers, these goblins were paid mercenaries, set to guard a not-so-real magical artifact called the Eye of Kars, said to grant the wielder great magical powers. Of course, it was a well-established lie to entice unwitting and greedy adventurers into their trap, and had thus far been very successful at that. In Evensong, it had gained mild notoriety as a place where no less than 3 separate parties had gone missing while investigating, and required adventurers of some repute to claim the eye themselves. The Evensong adventurers entered carefully, with Dexter taking the lead. He scouted ahead with his cane tapping against the rocks. He was followed by Deus and Delphine, with Astrid and Octavia in the rear. At first they descended, and the light from the surface dimmed. Dexter elected to strike himself a torch, the light of which announced their presence to all the denizens that lived there. They went through a tight tunnel, passing foot-long centipedes and pods of scuttling spiders, before finding themselves at an impasse of 2 tunnels. Doing what all talented and well-educated persons would do, they split the party, with Deus, Astrid, and Dexter going down the left tunnel, and Delphine dragging Octavia down the right. Astrid hummed herself a fanciful tune as they walked. Delphine insisted that she light herself some magical lights to guide them, and they found themselves going ever deeper, following the spider's movement until they imagined themselves upon a distressingly large web blocking their way. Delphine blasted it aside with a bolt of fire and passed through, thinking that the dripping upon her shoulder was just moisture from the surface, and the tingle on her neck merely a stray web. Octavia, meanwhile, was examining a pimple with her upright sword's reflection, and managed to catch the gigantic spider about to sink its fangs into her friend. Octavia shrieked, Delphine shrieked, and the spider shrieked, with the most panicked foray of flame escaping from Delphine's hands. The spider and large parts of Octavia were scorched. As Octavia peeled off the burned spider, she glared towards her partner and examined the new ghastly haircut she had now attained with a sense of disgust. And so they moved on, the scowl ever present upon her face. Meanwhile, the other three's tunnel went upwards, and then down, and sideways like a roller coaster. And then it twisted downwards, upside down. Astrid walking on her hands, while the others decided, sensibly, to drop to the floor and walk the correct way up. They heard some drums ahead, and strange musical sounds. Having explored a little further ahead, Dexter examined where the sound was coming from. He came back with silence. Rain! I hate rains! Which was met by Astrid excitedly jumping up and down and shouting, Party! Woo! Party! 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 And, of course, the recurrent face-palm of Deus. Before them were 30 or more goblins dancing around to a magic strobe lighting. The goggled goblin with bright pink hair and excessive makeup, acting as a DJ,
DJ Gubber in the house! Get your magic shrooms out, bro, and let's start the party!
Oh, yes. Evensong had stumbled upon their annual Glaston Goblin Festival in full swing. With a cheer, Astrid rushed in and joined the rave, while Deus attempted to chase after her, getting squashed in the mosh pit along the way. Dexter merely edged around the sides, trying to avoid their notice as he snuck out into a secret side tunnel. Now, after their unfortunate spider incident, Delphine and Octavia pulled themselves onwards. All the while, Delphine setting off traps that saw Octavia skewered, burnt, gassed, sliced open, skewered once more, and poked, prodded, and beaten until she looked like a rather sick porcupine. They eventually arrived at a chamber with a red orb on a pedestal. "Don't you dare!" cried Octavia, absolutely seething. Of course, Delphine, not one to listen to anyone, least of all to Octavia, grabbed the orb and walked away as a gigantic boulder came rushing down after them. While Delphine, in much better shape at this moment, managed to dash away, Octavia, exhausted and beaten, was about to add squashed to her list of ailments if it wasn't by pure luck. Having tripped and fallen down into a pit, narrowly avoiding her legs being crushed as the boulder toppled past. Delphine trundled her way back to the split in tunnels, and promptly, not waiting to see if Octavia had followed, bounded down after the others, as the boulder crashed into the wall behind her. In their intoxication, Astrid found themselves cheering with the goblins as they had captured Deus and were ready to roast him on a spit for their dinner. Fortunately, Delphine had heard the cries that sounded familiarly like a certain bookish soldier and looked for a solution. Dexter, meanwhile, had found a room with a large chest inside, and the greedy old man had set upon opening it with his many tools. However, the chest had had other plans, and he soon found himself fighting off the jaws of a terrifying mimic, with his cane as its slimy tongue tugged on his midriff as he yelped, pulled into the air. Octavia, eventually crawling out of the pit, half dead, followed the tunnel back down and staggered towards where she found the boulder had knocked open a secret passage to a room. A glittering sword with a red gem in its hilt lay before her. She grasped the hilt gingerly, and it spoke.
"Hi, I'm Derek."
She scoffed at the absurdity.
"I've been waiting for someone to free me. Thank you, brave one."
Octavia, completely done with the day and thinking that she was delusional, turned around, sighed, and walked away, leaving the sword behind. As she left, the sword whispered to itself.
"I will destroy you, weakling. How dare you?"
By the time Delphine had discovered a pretty blue rock that she found to trade for Deus, as you know, goblins do have a thing for pretty rocks, she came and dragged him down to the room where Dexter battled the mimic and blasted a bolt of flame into it, incinerating it.
"I had it! I can't believe you!"
Having saved Dexter and Deus, however, Delphine had unfortunately lost track of Astrid amongst the partying and cried to herself, "Oh, why do I have to do everything myself?" After perhaps an hour of searching, they gave up and left, having found the Eye of Cass. Deus and Dexter congratulated Delphine on her achievement, but were left silenced on the whereabouts of Octavia. as they exited the cavern. A seething, smoking, corpse-like figure with burnt hair and near 100 spikes jutting from their ash-covered armor reared its ugly head towards them. "Finally, you made it," Octavia whispered. But the sound of her caused the boys to flee in terror. Before they were stunned, as Delphine wrapped Octavia in a hug, smothering her feeble protests. "Oh boy, you lived! Thank you. Oh, what a relief." Octavia's eyes suggested murder. Sometime later, as the party lay exhausted and mended their wounds around a campfire, Astrid returned, humming a song and wearing a headband and face covered in luminescent paint and moss. In her hand was a sword with a glowing red gem in its hilt. It seemed to follow Octavia like an eye. "And hey guys! Amazing party, right? I cannot believe how good that was. Look at this cool thing I found!"
Hi, I'm Derek. Nice to meet you.
The sword's eye fixated on Octavia, and she could only stare at it. Back in Stonewell, Alphonse Dubois, master architect, watched on his magic camera, unimpressed at the results of this particular endeavor, and sought about ways he might conduct his revenge. I hope you enjoyed the beginning of this epic tale, and I sincerely cannot wait to have you at the campfire next time to hear more about the Evensong Adventurers Guild and their misadventures.